Welcome to this episode of Orthodontics in Interview. It's my absolute pleasure to bring you guys Alfred Griffin. So I've been watching Alfred's company, Lightforce, grow over the last couple of years, and it has been a really interesting evolution within orthodontics. I'm really excited to have him on board for today's podcast. So Alfred, I'm going to give an introduction. So he is the founder and CEO of Lightforce Orthodontics, which he established in 2015. It launched as a product 4 years ago in 2020. Alfred is an orthodontist. He has done his biochemistry degree from the University of Virginia. He did his DMD and PhD in University of South Carolina and has internationally lectured on craniofacial biology. He got his master's in medical sciences and certificate in orthodontics from the Harvard University of Dental Medicine, where he currently serves as faculty and board of visitors. He's an ABO certified practicing orthodontist. He comes from a lineage of dental practitioners. His dad was indeed an orthodontist, and his mum was a dentist.
Still are.
So Lightforce is an interesting company, and it's received, if I've got this correct, Alfred, and correct me, $144 million worth of investment from Track XN. Is that correct?
A little bit more, but I'm not sharp on the conversion rate, but it sounds ballpark right. Yeah.
Cool. Alfred, thank you so much for joining me for this Orthodontics in Interview podcast.
Yeah. Pleasure to be here. And drinking tea with a little milk in it in your honor, Farouk. So
very British. I can only salute that. So Alfred, I'm just going to give a quick summary because I've done a podcast in the past on Lightforce. So let me just give you my understanding of this product, and then we can dig down into the details. And I really want to kind of have that deep dive as to how you think to make this product, how this product works, and compare it to what we understand in terms of the emerging literature and what your opinions are of it. So here's my understanding of Lightforce. It's a 3D printed labial ceramic bracket system, CAD-CAM. The material is a polycrystalline labial ceramic bracket. It's all digitally planned. So you use LightPlan, is a commercial product, to then design the actual system itself. It then gets printed. There's also a jig associated with it, or a transfer tray. The doctors and clinicians receive that. They carry out indirect bonding, and that's how the product system works. You've got a range of bracket systems available, ranging from 018, 022, and an 020 as far as the bracket slot size goes. I hope that's a reasonable rendition of how Lightforce works.
That's great. Yeah. To add a bit more brevity, it's a platform for mass customization. We believe that the future of orthodontics is going to be personalized. And that's going to be enabled by the responsible application of modern technology, namely 3D printing and CAD software to our space. So, yeah, we're excited. We've been working on this for a while, and I think there's more to go.
So coming to how you came up with this, Alfred. So this is like back in 2013, if I remember from our previous conversation. So how did the inception of this digital platform, which wasn't there at that point in time, 3D bracket printing wasn't there at that point in time, how did you come about with this as a concept?
Well, I'll get more credit than I deserve, Farouk. I don't think this is a brilliant or novel idea. I think if you're an orthodontist, I think it's a pretty obvious idea that many people have written about quite a bit. I'll give David Sarver a little credit. He wrote about this 25 years ago, as well as others, and even back in the old days, I think Larry Andrews and many folks spoke about this. I think what was missing was the technology of the day, and other things such as scanners and other digital workflows that make this possible. But where I started to really personally have conviction in this, when I was a first year resident back in 2015, I remember being in the clinic and I would upload every one of my cases to the aligner software du jour, whatever we had then. And I would look at really how does that case come together? And I'd be looking at the torque, I'd be looking at the occlusal contacts, and for about 20%, 25% of my cases, we did more aligners than the average residency. I could I could have a digital appliance made based on that plan. For the other 75, 80% of my patients, I couldn't turn that plan into something, which is a bit frustrating to me because there's so much information you get from that. From a diagnostic and treatment planning perspective, like you can see what the Bolton discrepancy is very quickly, what the torque needs to be, the occlusal contacts, what's the smile aesthetics. You can look at all those things down in the smile arc. Hard to do that with stock appliances at scale. We're not taking out protractors and bringing out our single tooth torquing pliers all the time. So, and we didn't really know what the actual torque would be in the brackets anyway, because they're so variable. So we're like, there's got to be a better way. Where is 3D printing in the world? Are we at a place where we can make a clinically efficacious bracket for a price that adds excess value to orthodontists? Something I think Bezos used to say early on is customers should win 51%, we should win 49%. And that's kind of like how I think of this. Like if we can't make a fully custom bracket, or if we can make one, but it costs like $3,000, there's not a product to be made there. You can do it in theory, but it's not. There's asymmetric value. So it needs to be something that makes sense for orthodontists. And finally, we came across a technology that we think made sense, and I think continues to make sense.
So this idea of customization was the premise of how Lightforce then came about. So just kind of getting down to it, with this product of Lightforce, what is the advantage that it's going to give the clinician versus that stock bracket? Like, what are we actually achieving from that customization?
Yes. So there should be clinical benefits, there should be operational benefits, and there should be financial benefits once you run a digital practice. And we've observed those in market, primarily in the U.S., Canadian market, and now in Australia, New Zealand. On the clinical side, it really comes down to fewer visits. It comes down to shorter treatment times. Sometimes there's some countries where that's not necessarily economically incentivized. Like there's some countries, I believe, I could get this wrong, Germany, I think Brazil, where you get paid per visit. That those incentives don't align with our technology quite yet. But that's a government issue. Other things are, what's the duration of each appointment? What's the standard deviation of the duration of the appointment? So like you want to build in a more consistent workflow, and we've seen a lot of that from the clear aligner world. If you can't be an orthodontist in modern society without offering some kind of clear aligners, I don't think. Some people may push back on that, but that's kind of what I've seen. And so you should see a lot of efficiency in those cases, maybe a higher lab fee, but you see efficiency. That's what we want to apply to the bigger market opportunity. So if you look at the world of patient starts, it's globally, it's over 90% braces. So what that means is globally, less than 10% are digital. I think that's probably the biggest market opportunity in orthodontics is to digitize that sector of the market. And there have been some great attempts at it. I think there's been some challenges both on the technology side, maybe the timing as well. But we think it's inevitable, and we think we've got a pretty good shot at elevating orthodontics.
Alfred, where that is within the marketplace. So of course, there's other digital bracket systems that are available, right? So I mean, we've had Insignia, which has been long standing as a customized label bracket system. There's SureSmile, there's Dibs for digital indirect bonding systems, and there's a whole host of other companies. So like, where does Lightforce fit into that? Is it just another version of? Or is there something which you would say from your perspective is an advantage over the other products that are out there? And I appreciate it's your company and it's your product, so of course you may perceive it to be, but where do we stand as orthodontists looking at this product in this marketplace?
Well, first of all, Farouk, you're not going to trick me into throwing stones at any of those companies. I'm actually a big fan of all of them. I think, in fact, I would encourage people to try all of them.
Wow.
I think that there is a sector of orthodontics that is going to become digital, and some of those technologies that you mentioned, those are going to be a bridge to being fully digital. I believe Lightforce is probably the most custom version of those, but that we might not be for everybody right now, which is fine. I would encourage you to look at some of the others as a good bridge. I think that I believe a rising tide lifts all ships, and that there is a sector of orthodontics, digital orthodontics, that I'd love to see win. And so any win in that category, I think, is going to be a good thing for Lightforce and a good thing for patients and orthodontists. But I'm happy to get into any of the nuances of those systems and how we're slightly different, if that's helpful.
Cool. So actually, what I did want to pick you up on was about digital indirect printing. So we take a conventional stock bracket. A number of companies do this. You do digital indirect planning, and then they customize the base of the bracket with the composite, essentially.
Mhm.
Transfer jig and so forth costs are much smaller than the Alfred Lightforce. When we're comparing that, and you're talking about having a product which can be scaled at mass, wouldn't that lend itself to the orthodontic community, because essentially the lab fees are less and it's a stock bracket, you already have it?
Yes, totally. It's a great technology. It's been around for quite a bit. I think it's been around, but it's had some limitations, and they've been tiny paper cuts of challenges. Again, like I still believe this is better than the direct bonding path. So please don't, if you're listening, interpret this as a knock on this technology. But here's some of the challenges that I believe it faced. Um, One, it's still a stock bracket, so you're still limited in terms of the torque that you can express. You're also limited in where you can put the bracket. So a very practical example is, we're orthodontists. We see the tough cases. Uh, Imagine if you have a tooth that's like rotated or blocked out, and you can only stick a bracket on either the mesial or distal part of that tooth. If you're indirect bonding it, you have to put it on the distal side and then derotate, drop a wire, rebond somewhere on FA point. That costs you 2, 3 appointments, something like that. Even if you're indirect bonding with Lightforce, a fully custom system, you can stick it on the mesial distal, leave it there, and it's totally fine. You don't need to drop a wire or anything. So that's one practical example. We see this pretty commonly in many cases. Another example is sometimes do you teach in residency? So imagine you've got an adult case coming in that's got, maybe they're like slightly class 2, they've got a worn indentition, and all you want to really fix is the front 3 to 3, maybe improve the smile arc a little bit. But you're watching that resident bond the posterior teeth, and you're like, oh man, I'm going to change that bite, aren't I? So a big part of the clear aligner world is controlling what not to do as well. And unless you have a fully custom system, you can't really do that. Even if you're indirect bonding, you're going to express rotations, torque, things like that. Fully custom system, you can make the posterior totally passive, totally straight wire, because again, the bracket adapts to the tooth anatomy where it is at the moment. And then there are other benefits that are unique to the platform, such as custom bite turbos that people use not just for defensive purposes. And I say defensive, like keeping the upper teeth off of brackets, but more like offensive. Like, let's put anterior turbos in a deep bite class 2 to disclude the posterior to help open the bite. Lay elastics early on. Like, that's how now people are using bite turbos on the offensive as a functional tool to improve uh, uh, overbite, the vertical. So um, Smile Arc is another great example. One part of Smile Arc that I think is underappreciated is torque. A lot of Lightforce users, they say all the time, treat to the upper incisor, but the Smile Arc is not just where the upper incisor is; it's where's the lower incisor. You have to move the two in harmony, in coordination, and it's not just the vertical; it's the torque that has to be right to get that great anterior coupling. So I think those are some of the main highlights. There's some other things I think our users would suggest, but um, I'd also just say that we're still learning as well. And I would say the community of orthodontists using Lightforce are the ones teaching us, not the other way around, which has been a pretty cool thing to be a part of.
So Alfred, is this the digital indirect system essentially replicating what's available in the analog system? It's a bit like how taking impressions, for example, using standard alginate versus taking a scan. Actually, it's taken initially it was just getting equivalence between the two. Can a digital scan actually be as good as taking a conventional alginate impression?
Yes.
Now, what you've described there is customization of brackets, okay, with the prescription. One could argue in analog brackets, you can flip brackets, you can swap brackets, other things you can do. High torque brackets, you can bribe them off the shelves if you wish to do so. Things like having the bite turbos that you mentioned, well, those are also available from an analog perspective as well, and perhaps without much complication. So my question to you is, where do you see the digital platform giving the advantage in those specifics?
Yeah. So it's I think we operationalize great outcomes,
Okay.
and I think that's been the biggest challenge. I think if you look at some other big innovations in the world, you look at space travel, for example. SpaceX. We've been able to launch rockets into space before, but you see the SpaceX rocket go up and it kind of lands itself, and then you just need to refuel it and it can go back up. So what you're really solving there is not space travel; you're solving for operationalizing it.
With you.
Same thing with electric cars. We've been able to build electric cars for a long time, but we haven't been able to build them at a cost that makes a business case. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of the big automakers have figured out as well. And you look in orthodontics, we've actually, I'll give you another example. One thing I learned recently is have you used a positioner before?
Yes.
Yeah. So the first positioner was invented in 1946 by Dr. Kessling. And they would make those by making these little stone models and then cutting the teeth and then moving them in increments and super gluing them, and you could disconnect it. And that was really the first clear aligner. And so then you ask yourself, like, why isn't Dr. Kessling a bajillionaire right now? It's arguably because that was not operational. That's a labor intensive thing. So then what did Align Technology solve for in 1997? So they applied 3D printing
Mm-hmm.
and CAD software to aligner production
Yeah.
or old positioner production. And so really what they did is they operationalized the ability to make an aligner
Mm-hmm.
using automation. So that's exactly what I would argue Lightforce as a platform will do to braces in your practice, is help you operationalize great outcomes. You can still get great outcomes today with a stock bracket. So I'm not. This is not to make anyone feel lesser than for using stock braces. I would just suggest it's going to take you a bit more work. You might have to get out your single tooth torquing plier to get that next level of perfection. You may need to do some bends to get the smile arc ideal with the anterior coupling. You may need to sculpt turbos yourself. A great thing about Lightforce, a lot of this can also be delegated to staff. So if you're a doctor, really what I think this does, it helps you operationalize excellent results. Now, obviously, there's a cost to that, so there's a balance. But that's where I think this is going, Farouk.
Really interesting. So I suppose with the world of aligners as well, there's almost a step back from the clinician being involved with seeing the patients, right? So we're kind of going towards that, doing orthodontics almost from a screen. And actually, this would probably further that as a process and a cause. And that's really interesting to see as how that maps itself then. Could we actually live that dream and work from home as orthodontists? Still my dream.
I don't think that's part of it. I think there's still things orthodontists have to do. Like we have to be there for consults. I think we have to do procedures like IPR. There's still in Lightforce, there's still cases where you need to direct bond brackets. It's called out in the software as well. And then you also have to you have to evaluate the case every time you see. You got to take a look, see what's going on, and sometimes you make adjustments. Like maybe it's time to take the bite turbos off, or there's always functional appliances that need to be delivered and synced as well. So I don't think we're ever moving in that direction. But I do think that there's a world where orthodontists can be more effective in practice, maybe by increasing capacity or working fewer days. Being more efficient, I would say.
That's really interesting. You've mentioned duration a couple of times, so I just want to discuss that as well. So when it comes to you've discussed how it's more efficient, right? You've mentioned about not having to be confined by bracket positioning. You can position the bracket anywhere and still get the same outcome. Customizing the bracket prescription, having less finishing to do because you're idealizing things from the outset. When it comes to then looking into the research, we tend to see there's very little on Lightforce, relatively new product, but we've got this really large, incredibly large range of how much Lightforce reduces treatment. Tim Wheeler's study, for example, that came out this year, showed an 8-month reduction compared to conventional appliances. And that was published in the JCO. That was Waldman's paper from last year, showed 12-month reduction compared to fixed. Now, what's interesting is that there's a thesis not published yet from the University of Buffalo. Alia Hamiduddin published it. And she showed compared to clear aligners, there was no difference at all when it came to treating mild to moderate cases. So we've got this extreme as to how much actually Lightforce reduces time. You weren't involved with these studies, and I appreciate that. But what's your thoughts when we see such extremes? As an orthodontist, as somebody involved in reading literature, I look at that and say, well, hold on. Do we actually have an answer to this? What do you think?
Well, first of all, he says, Alia. Yeah, if you're listening, thank you for doing the research. Regardless of the outcome, I think it's a great thing for residents to be doing research, especially into new technology. So, I think we approach science from a deep place of appreciation, um, regardless of the outcome. I think we should all be seeking truth and learning about new technology in either direction. Um, as far as the discrepancy in the outcomes, like I said, I haven't read that thesis, but what I do believe is that, like anything, digital orthodontics is a muscle you flex and get better at. And so, if you looked at a study that was done, for example, by residents who are new, I'd really be questioning, like, all right, what kind of supervision did they have? Was it an experienced digital orthodontist helping them? But then again, that's a pretty big confounding factor. Um, I'm less familiar with the thesis. I'm more familiar with the two studies, which I do believe were pretty well designed. And Tim Wheeler is a very he was actually in my dad's angle class, and he was the chairman at Florida for many years. So and he published a lot of the early class 2 studies, and was involved in a lot of early Invisalign studies, and I think he was also involved in a paid trial for one of the tooth vibrating tools, for which his research showed that it did not work. So one of the reasons I was excited that he did this research is because this is a guy that's not afraid to call your baby ugly. And again, as I said, we're after truth here. So, um, but I think a lot of it depends on the experience of the clinician, and we've seen the second trial that was published with the 4 doctors. It was again retrospective trial, showed that there were still some rebonds and or sorry debonds and or sorry repositions and wire bends, um, but a reduction in wire bends was in repos was the primary mechanism for the efficiency with Lightforce. But the other thing that he studied was what happened to those wire bends over time, because it's covered a 2-year period. And what he found is that the wire bends went down over time. So for 3 of the people that had gave open access to their treatment notes. So why that's interesting to me is that it's they're getting better over time, which you'd expect. We could give our Lightforce a little bit of credit, say we've gotten better as a product over time, but I think the bigger issue is the users have learned more. Um, but the cycle time to learn on Lightforce has been interesting for me, in that in the early days when you're starting out, like if you see a tooth on light plan and and it's very much rotated, how much do you overcorrect for it in light plan? When you're first starting out, you have no idea. And the cycle time to learn might be like 12, 18 months to get the case finished. So like we've been a product, really complete product, 7 to 7 since August 22. So we've learned quite a bit over that period of time. But anytime you do a trial, it's a moment in time. And so that's one of the limitations. But I think as the product evolves and as users gain more experience, and the community we continues to invest in education quite a bit, but as we continue to learn more, I think the users will become better at using the tool, and I think the product will evolve as well.
And you're right, that's absolutely the downside to carrying out research, is that, especially when it's retrospective, is that
Yeah.
actually your product may have innovated and changed by the time you get to the end output. And this is kind of perhaps where the speed of research now needs to be accelerated. Like, how do we get things published quickly so we can see this information kind of not in real time, but as close as we can?
Yeah.
Talking about research, this year in August 2024, you were picked for Kevin O'Brien's blog over this particular paper that came out by Tim Wheeler. Now, there were some statements there that were quite direct. And I want to give you the opportunity to respond back to them, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
If I can just read directly from the blog.
Please.
So the first is Lightforce is making claims using dodgy evidence. The second thing stated about this about Lightforce, when it came to how it's been referencing things, is that orthodontic companies, including Lightforce, have also adopted this tactic, with Ormco citing low quality papers. Acceladent, as you've already mentioned, was found not to be effective. But they relied upon poor published trials, issuing it in different types of journals, and with authors who have a conflict of interest. So That's quite a statement said from a revered academic within orthodontics. So, Alfred, what's your thoughts upon this idea that Lightforce is making dodgy claims and actually shouldn't have used this evidence because of how low quality it is in terms of retrospective and selection bias and so forth?
Sure. So, okay, I'll respond personally first. Um, so, as you mentioned earlier, my dad's an orthodontist. I've been in this world for a while. I am a big fan of Kevin O'Brien's. I think he's a great academic. I think he takes a pretty harsh tone on new technology. But as an example of my respect for him, we got to pick our graduation speaker at Harvard, and I picked Kevin. Actually, Kevin came and he was my graduation speaker at Harvard Ortho, and I was the primary person that requested him. So I remember meeting him and being in awe because I used to read his blog all the time. My dad and I would send each other his blog. So lots of respect there. It's interesting being the other side of the table though, Farouk, because you see the counterbalance to it. I think that there are a lot of skeptics, and I'm not going to say this is just Kevin, but there are other skeptics in orthodontics, and I think that they believe that an absence of evidence for is an argument against using a product. And as a background, you mentioned I spent a lot of time in grad school. Did I'm a glutton for academic punishment. Did a PhD. Grad school 101 is teaching you that in absence of evidence for is not evidence against. And so, when you look at a new technology like Lightforce, you can make a decision to either do research or just not do research and just lean on what the market says. I think we made an earlier investment in research than most would. And certainly there's a pyramid of evidence. And the top of that pyramid, you've got, randomized clinical controlled study. Midway down, you've got cohort studies, retrospective studies, and then at the bottom, you got like case reports. So our first study was a single practice retrospective study. The next study, we said, all right, let's add 3 more doctors to that. So now we've got a cohort retrospective study. So we're moving up the pyramid of evidence. We're not all, and I actually I reached out to Kevin before we launched Lightforce, and I asked him for his guidance. And I hope this is okay to share openly, but he encouraged. He said, you guys should do a peer-reviewed randomized control study, prospective. My response to that is A, that's very expensive. B, that's a point in time. Why would we want to get graded on a point in time? Especially given how early we are. Like we are still, there's a lot coming in the roadmap, but like we're at a point in time. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But there's a world of people that need to have a Cochrane review to prove to themselves the sky is blue. Those are not the people that should be using Lightforce right now. I'll add one more point to that, if that's okay.
Please do.
One thing Kevin said that I don't want to dismiss is that using these claims, we did have a single trial that showed that there was 40% efficiency. Do I expect all people to have that for all cases? No. And I'll say maybe there is an opportunity to revisit our messaging on that. I think we say up to, but I think there's some nuance there that I think could be more genuinely said that it's going to. You could get this, we've seen this, but there are other things that you need to do to learn and educate and get yourself up to that level of experience. But I'll also say that there are companies far bigger than Lightforce that will make similar claims with a white paper. Okay? Not a peer-reviewed trial in a journal like JCO. So that's been our approach. Happy to defend it and own it. But like I said, we're open to feedback and always expect to be innovating and doing the best thing for the customer and the best thing to preserve a brand that orthodontists are proud to be affiliated with.
Excellent. So if I can come back to the product, there's 2 things I want to ask you about. First is you're saying that the doctors can reduce the intervals that they have, but the ligation of the product, so you've customized the bracket, but it's still conventional elastomeric ligation. And that undergoes viscoelastic deformation. It reduces the force as time goes on. So how are you able to reduce the intervals with using conventional ligation? And the second question I want to ask you is about the customization. It's still a conventional arch wire. So the force delivery is bracket slot interaction. You're not controlling the wire when it comes to Lightforce. So
Yes, great question. So if you think about, first of all, roughly 85% of Lightforce users were using self-ligating brackets, um, which is an interesting fact, right? I think it's just there's a segment of orthodontists that appreciate technology, and for many years, the only innovation in braces was the form of ligation. And certainly that will enable you to not have to tie in brackets. So in the rotational dimension, that's helpful. The compromise is, as one of my professors called it, you're kind of dealing with socks on a rooster. They're bigger and it's hard to get the exact expression. I did all of my ABO cases on passive self-ligating brackets, and I had to make some pretty major wire bends to get home to where I needed to be for that case to be accepted. It was a case I was proud of. So um, with Lightforce, you can imagine there's some teeth that you're going to need to have some rotations on that you're going to have elastomeric decay that's going to impact how long that case is in treatment. So those cases, you might want to steel tie those if they're severe. But in the cases where you're doing second degree and vertical movements, the bracket's going to do it. It's a bracket. You're not that's not going to be impacted by the elastomeric. Um, and so what we believe, what I personally believe, is that if you're focused more, and actually I think the research on ligation would say it saves you a little bit of time in the tie-in, but binding is still the critical element in friction and other things. So what I would tell people is that if you're concerned about the form of ligation versus controlling the vectors of force applied to the teeth, then you're losing the forest for the trees.
okay.
I think that'd be the opinion of most people with experience enough.
Second thing was about the archwire. The archwire isn't customized, as I understand it. So again, the
Yes.
bracket slot interaction, you're only influencing the slot, but not the actual force delivery from the wire.
Yeah, so today the setups are based on an average of where the teeth are in the initial state to form the arch form. And then what we'll do is the software will give you access to an arch form that you can use to customize the arch form of your wire. So you can still customize the arch form if you pull out some pliers. It's not ideal. Ideally, you would be able to have custom wires, but like I said, we stand on the shoulder of giants, and one thing we learned from um, users of previous attempts at custom brackets is is that the custom wires sent were used in roughly 3% of cases. So while it sounds right in theory, I don't disagree with you. It just practically wasn't used or valued by orthodontists, so we didn't do it. Um, Lightforce just very proud. We just made a big release, our biggest software improvement to LightPlan in 2.5 years. That came out mid-November, and one of the updates is arch form control. So it gives the doctor more control over the arch form, but again, they're still going to have to make some of those adjustments. But I would also tell you most, and this is actually looking at the trial, the second publication. They looked at the percentage of cases that finished in NiTis versus TMA or steel, and the vast majority of cases finished in NiTi, and they still saw the par scores they saw. So I think as a group, sometimes we may over rotate to arch form. Certain cases it absolutely matters, but there's some cases it may have minimal influence that may not be worth the extra time in braces. But that's a clinical judgment call.
One of the final clinical questions I want to ask you was about Lightforce. Is it restricted to a philosophy? Is it restricted to the bi-dimensional philosophy with your different slot size? Is it restricted to mild to moderate cases? And that was Alia Hamaduddin's thesis that we spoke about earlier on, just looking at mild to moderate cases. Is there a restriction to this as a process? Because I also understand from a friction perspective, you've got a higher load of friction compared to conventional brackets.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to be super objective, I think the Lightforce system has more friction than it should right now.
Okay.
I think that there's an opportunity to improve that, and I expect. I'm not sure when we're publishing this, but I expect that to happen next week. So we'll talk about that soon. But some of it is, like I said, is learning. Is how do you design a bracket that's 3D printed that has the lowest coefficient of friction possible. The best thing we can do is iterate and improve as quickly as we can, and that's the benefit of being a fully custom platform is that we don't need to make new molds to make new brackets. If you think about traditional bracket companies, they're incentivized to use the same mold as many times as doctors will buy them. Whereas Lightforce innovation is free. We can modify an STL file. Obviously, we work closely with the FDA or all the regulatory bodies, but we can make changes and improvements to the product fairly quickly, which is a strength and one of the reasons I think the world should bet on this company.
So can you carry out extractions in Lightforce? That's my
Oh,
question.
extractions, yes, of course. Yeah, so simple cases are great, but complex ones are too. There are many oral surgeons out there that prefer doctors to use Lightforce because it reduces their surgical time, because they're not drilling off cusps in the middle of surgery. And obviously, surgical time has a big correlation to morbidity in the outcomes. Space closure, if you want to mitigate friction, closing loops are great. Other people you just use undersized wires for space closure, and then pick up the torque later with a rectangular wire towards the end of treatment. So there are adjustments that you make clinically to compromise for, maybe call it, some of the limitations in the platform today. But where it typically nets out is a net substantial increase in efficiency and outcomes. And I would say that anecdotally. But it's also my lived experience too.
So Alfred, you've spoken about some innovations coming out with Lightforce. You've already mentioned that there's going to be an update when it comes to light plan and arch form control. What else are we expecting to see from Lightforce coming out as far as innovation is concerned?
Really good question. Whenever we do like a Lightforce event or like an education event, one of the things we ask very openly at the end is, what should we improve about the product? And doctors are not shy about telling us, things they want to see built. And so I would tell you that if you're thinking it, we're thinking about it too. And one thing that's nice, I'm one of the cool things is that Lightforce today, by volume, is the world's largest manufacturer of directly 3D printed medical devices by parts. So what that means is that most 3D printing companies want to show us what they're working on and how we could work together. So we have our finger on the pulse of 3D printing technology, and again are always thinking, how can we responsibly apply this to the platform to improve life for our customers and patients. So I think one thing that I'm very excited about in the near term that I can talk about, like I said, Light Plan had a major improvement. You're going to see improvements to the occlusal contacts, arch form control. For the bigger users, there's patient search and query is much easier. A variety of other benefits too. And then the other thing that I'm excited about is how we apply machine learning to give a signal on where the roots should be. Again, this is to help the doctor in guiding the second degree setups for the teeth. So how to adjust the tips. The early returns are quite exciting. And again, this is a great example of applying technology to reduce the dose that we give some patients to do CBCT, to see roots. So I think technology is catching up to where we can improve patient outcomes and patient care that didn't exist before. So we're excited to apply things like that to the platform, and many more to come in 25.
Cool. And the very last thing, Alfred, is that one, and I'd like to know, what is the one piece of advice you would give to orthodontists out there in our community?
Yeah, I would say that the future is bright. I think orthodontics deserves a lot of credit. I think we don't get enough for leading the charge in 3D printing. Everyone, like early on when 3D printing came out, like all the credit was and all the upside people thought would come from orthopedics. But an interesting fact, Farouk, if you consider the market cap of Align Technology and you look at the rest of the 3D printing industry combined, that one application of 3D printing, aligners, is worth 3 to 4 times the entire market cap of the whole rest of the 3D printing industry.
Wow.
So I think that tells you two things. One is that the way to really make a business 3D printing is the application of the technology. How do you help the world? Not how do you make a 3D printer or 3D printing materials. And I think the second thing that it tells you is that the lowest hanging fruit for an application of 3D printing happens to be in the mouth. in orthodontics, actually. So orthodontics really is, I believe, responsible for a lot of the growth that we've seen in the 3D printing world. And I think there's going to be more to come. So
Amazing. Alfred, that brings this interview to a wrap. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. And for the audience out there, please do subscribe and look forward to the next episode. Thank you so much,
yeah,
Alfred.
thank you for doing this podcast. Cheers.